Sam, tell us all about the article, why you wrote it, basically what the angle is.
Yeah, well, I don't think the article itself is sort of telling us anything that we don't know. It's more just sort of to do with the timing, and I guess allows us to reflect on a process that's been going on for the last sort of 10, perhaps even longer than 10 years since Manchester City had the takeover. I guess it was kind of born from the comments which Ilkay Gundogan made after Barcelona's Clásico defeat. He made comments about, you know, the reaction from the players and him basically being a little bit disappointed by the lack of emotion, by the lack of sort of feelings, I guess, in the dressing room. And it was a little bit to do with, you know, these standards that he's bought from Manchester City, which, you know, on the back of winning a treble, winning the Champions League, everything that he sort of learned under Pep Guardiola, sort of the standards off and on the pitch, not quite being perhaps what he expected at Barcelona is the implication. And that sort of delves into a whole wider issue if you then go back. And of course, Manchester City, their whole backroom staff, their whole sort of model, their ownership, not the ownership model, but the people that they've brought in to run things like Chiqui Begiristain, Ferran Soriano, obviously all ex-Barca. There are people that, if are not ex-Barca, sort of behind the scenes, are all sort of from Catalonia or have connections to Catalan companies or have worked in Spain. And the idea that City have sort of, this is kind of, I guess, the moment where we realise that, wow, because City have really sort of replaced Barca by doing what Barca were doing sort of 10 years ago under Guardiola themselves.
Yeah, so Barcelona's loss is absolutely Man City's gain in more ways than one. And just talking about Gundogan's criticism there, we've seen Aguero as well criticise the standards compared to Manchester City, Rob. That probably doesn't come as a surprise to you, given Pep's high demands, to hear players now saying that it's not quite the same at Barcelona.
No, not really. And that was, you know, especially true in the summer. You know, City have come off a season where they've won the treble. They've had this historic season, won absolutely everything. They've had this big parade through Manchester and everyone's happy. Pep Guardiola gets his players in on the first day of pre-season and tells them they've got to go and do it all over again. And that really is evidence of the kind of standards that he expects at City, that it's not enough to win a treble. You know, we interviewed Manuel Akanji a couple of weeks ago for ESPN, and the first thing out of his mouth was that the expectation for this season was to win the treble again. You know, it's hard enough to win one treble, let alone win it twice in a row. But that's, again, the expectation that Pep Guardiola has of his players, and that's probably what Ilkay Gundogan is talking about. You know, Barcelona is obviously a massive club, but the margins for error at the top level of European football is so small that it is about, you know, desire and that kind of demand for excellency. And if you haven't got that, you know, you fall slightly short. And City have shown that if you can keep that demand and that level very, very high, that you can be incredibly successful. You know, they've not only been successful in terms of trophies, but they've also been particularly consistent. You know, they've won 5 out of the last 6 Premier League titles. They've reached at least the semi-finals of the Champions League in each of the last 3 years. You know, it's very, very hard to maintain that level, and that's what City have managed.
Yeah, let me stick with you a minute as well, Rob, because something else that Sam's got in the piece is how much transfer decisions have contributed to City's rise and Barcelona's downfall. And that's something that we do see with City. They seem to be very savvy when it comes to the signings, and they won't overpay.
Yeah, and that's exactly it. You know, obviously Pep Guardiola will take an awful lot of credit for what he's achieved at City. But if you were to ask him about the most important man at City at the moment, he would tell you it's Chiqui Begiristain, that the sporting director, a guy that they've taken from Barcelona. Obviously, Pep Guardiola is a genius coach, but it's been Begiristain's job to build that squad, and not only just build it for 1 or 2 seasons, but build it for the last sort of 10 years. And that's why they can, you know, not only create title-winning teams, but also weather problems. You know, this season, after a treble, they've had Gundogan, who was a key player, go to Barcelona. They've also lost Kevin De Bruyne to injury. He won't be back until after Christmas. But City have been able to maintain their level, and they're still top of the Premier League and through their group in the Champions League. It really is, you know, incredible what Begiristain has managed to achieve at City, because, you know, lots of people listening to this will probably sit there and think, well, it's all very well, you know, City winning all this stuff. It's because they've had the most money to spend. Well, you know, that's not strictly true, because just, you know, looking in Manchester, you know, United and City over the last sort of 10 years have spent, you know, relatively similar amounts on transfers. But United have a very, very little success, whereas City have managed to not only continue to win things, but also every single season to be right up there challenging for every trophy. And you only have to look at the rest of the Premier League over the last 10 years. You know, the big clubs like Man United, Chelsea, Arsenal, Tottenham have all had spells where they've failed to even qualify for the Champions League. City have not only managed to qualify every single season, but for the last 10 years, I think it's 11 now, have managed to qualify from the group. So it tells you that not only have they been incredibly successful, they're being incredibly consistent as well. And if you ask Pep Guardiola who was responsible for that, he would tell you it's cheeky Begiristan.
Yeah, and obviously, Sam, you've highlighted in the article that it is the exact opposite with Barcelona. We've seen some massive money signings that haven't really lived up to the expectations, to say the least. Who did you pick out in the article in that aspect?
Yeah, I mean the obvious ones are the ones that they blew big money on after selling Neymar, which was Felipe Coutinho, who's probably the standout one when they paid 160 million euros for him, and the performances he brought were nowhere near that level. And then also the sort of loss they've had on then moving him on to Aston Villa after disappointing loans at Bayern Munich. Obviously, Antoine Griezmann is another one. Ousmane Dembele, who did have some bright spells and did bring them some money when he left to Paris Saint-Germain in the end, but perhaps didn't quite deliver on the investment. But then there's just loads of other signings that they've made which haven't really worked out for sums of money that you almost forget. 40 million on Andrew Gomez here, 35 million on Paco Alcácer there. People like that. The transfer strategy has been a bit scattergun over the last decade. And talking to ex-directors, and with that comparison with Manchester City, they sort of point out the lack of stability at the club. In the time that Chiqui's been at Manchester City, Barcelona have had 7 different sporting directors, some working in tandem, some working on their own. You also have coaches with power. And it just means there's no sort of cohesive decision making over any length of time. And every sort of season they're looking to sort of rebuild or make different changes because there's no continuity there.
Just sticking with the City Barca angle then, Sam, and let me stay with you on this one. How have the signings, in your opinion, that have come from City to Barcelona been? Obviously, we've mentioned Gundogan there. Cancelo is one that's standing out right now. We've got to mention Eric Garcia as well, and Torres. Who stands out to you? What would you like to say about those signings coming that way?
Yeah, I mean, I think Gundogan's made a decent start. He's coming at a time when, as we've discussed today, Barcelona aren't playing that well. He is the one that looks to make things happen. It's not been ideal because obviously Xavi wanted him and Pedri and De Jong and Gavi to sort of form that midfield, and at different times different players have been injured, so there's not been any continuity in midfield, and Gundogan's role has changed. It doesn't help, I guess, when you're adapting, having to play perhaps sometimes even as a pivot, sometimes as one of the more advanced midfielders, so that's not helped. But he is the one player, and he hasn't had a lot of sort of acclaim really since he came to the club, but I think he has been the one player that when backs are against the wall, he does look to get on the ball, he does look to make things happen, he does look to take responsibility. Cancelo is, he's clearly enjoying himself with the ball. There are big questions without the ball. I'm sure these are one of the reasons why perhaps he didn't quite sort of last at Manchester City or his loan at Bayern Munich. But with the ball, and there have been performances when he's been really good, and he really does fit that style of play. And he's exactly the type of player that Barca want when we talk about having to excel and play in a certain manner. They want a right back like Cancelo. The question then becomes, can you afford to have Cancelo as the right back if you've also got Balde on the left back bombing forward? Little intricacies like that. I guess Ferran Torres and Eric Garcia have been more disappointing. Ferran Torres has been in and out of the team. I thought he had a good first 6 months when he came, but he's very much sort of a squad player now. And Eric Garcia is obviously out on loan, doing much better than Barca, top of the league with Girona, who are of course part owned by the City group as well.
Yeah, and it seems to have been a really good fit for him as well. I tell you what, just looking at this article, and obviously all our viewers will be able to read it on ESPN FC, Rob, it makes me question how worrying it is for Manchester City once Pep does decide to go and take all his team with him.
And that's the golden question. We can sit here and rave about City's structure, the direction and the plan that they've got off the field, but it's whether it can weather that issue when Pep Guardiola finally decides that he wants to go and I don't know, maybe manage a national team or just retire in total. They have had a great structure, and Sam's right to point out how stable it's been. Particularly stable when you look around the rest of the clubs in Europe. But we've seen, particularly in the Premier League, that when a genius manager leaves after a long spell of time, that it's very, very difficult for the club to carry on winning. Liverpool had it when Kenny Dalglish left in 1990. They went through a long spell after that where they didn't win the title. United are in the middle of it now, since Sir Alex Ferguson left in 2013. The real test of City's direction and plan off the field will be when Pep Guardiola decides that he wants to go and try other things. It remains to be seen whether Begiristan and Ferran Soriano stay, or whether they decide that when Pep's gone, that they want to go and do other things too, and maybe take on other challenges. So obviously it would help City if they were to remain in situ and maybe help City navigate what is going to be a very, very difficult spell when Pep leaves. I'm sure that Guardiola will tell you that he thinks that the club is stable enough to cope with him leaving, But obviously, it's very easy to sit here and say that the proof will be in the pudding. It's not easy for any manager to follow what Pep Guardiola has done at City, as we've seen or are seeing right now with Man United. It's been 10 years since Sir Alex Ferguson retired, and United still can't win the big trophies that they're really after. So the real test of what City have put in place will be after Pep Guardiola leaves.
All right, guys, it's been so great to get the insight from both of you, and all of our viewers can hear a lot more from both of you across our YouTube channel, and also read a lot more from the two of you on ESPN FC. Thanks so much for being with us today.